Chapter 1. The Unexpected Invitation. Hercule Poirot sat in his impeccably ordered London flat, a cup of tisane steaming gently beside him. It was mid-December, and though the streets outside bustled with the hurried cheer of Christmas shoppers, Poirot felt no particular urge to join them. He had always found the English Christmas charming in its sentimentality, yet faintly exhausting in its excess. The little grey cells, he believed, functioned best in quiet precision, not amid roaring fires and endless plum pudding. On this particular afternoon, the post had brought the usual assortment: bills discreetly disguised as polite reminders, a catalogue of gentlemen's gloves he had no intention of ordering, and one envelope that immediately arrested his attention. It was thick, creamy paper of the finest quality, addressed in a bold, aristocratic hand. The wax seal bore the crest of a stag rampant beneath a coronet. Poirot raised an eyebrow. He turned the envelope over with the delicacy he might accord a suspicious parcel, then slit it open with his silver letter-knife. Inside was a single card, heavy and embossed. Lord Edmund Harrington requests the pleasure of the company of Monsieur Hercule Poirot at Blackwood Manor, Wiltshire, for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. A smaller note, handwritten on the same crested paper, was enclosed. My dear Monsieur Poirot, I have long admired your extraordinary gifts. This Christmas I intend to display a family heirloom of considerable historical interest, the Sapphire Dagger of Rajasthan, acquired by my grandfather during the Indian campaigns of the last century. Rumour has attached a certain unfortunate legend to the blade, and I confess I should feel easier knowing that the greatest detective of the age is among my guests should any mischief arise. The party will be small and select. The Wiltshire roads can be treacherous in snow, but my chauffeur shall collect you from the station at your convenience. I remain, with highest regards, Edmund Harrington Poirot, placed the note upon his desk, and leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. The invitation intrigued him on several counts. First, Lord Harrington was not a man who sought publicity. The Harringtons were old nobility, wealthy, discreet, and known for guarding their privacy with the ferocity of dragons over treasure. Blackwood Manor itself had scarcely appeared in society columns for a generation. Second, the mention of the Sapphire Dagger stirred a faint memory. Poirot had once, years ago in Paris, heard whispers of a magnificent Mughal dagger, its hilt encrusted with sapphires of exceptional Susan colour, said to have been looted during the 1857 uprising. Legend claimed the dagger carried a curse, that any owner who displayed it on Christmas Eve would meet misfortune before the bells rang for morning service. Third, and most telling, was the tone of the note. Lord Harrington wrote with courtesy, yet beneath the polished phrases, Poirot detected something else, an undercurrent of unease, perhaps even fear. The phrase, "should any mischief arise," was not idle politeness. It was a plea. Poirot rose and crossed to the window. Snow had begun to fall, soft and silent, blanketing the rooftops opposite in white. He watched it for a long moment, then turned back to his desk. He rang the bell for George, his impeccable valet. "George," he said when the man appeared, "we shall be travelling to the country for Christmas. Please prepare my heaviest overcoat, the fur-lined boots, and the green wool scarf my aunt from Liège sent last year. Also, pack my small revolver, the one with the mother-of-pearl handle. One never knows." George permitted himself the ghost of a smile. "Very good, sir. May I ask where we are bound?" "Blackwood Manor, in Wiltshire, home of Lord Harrington." George's eyebrows lifted fractionally. The Harringtons, sir? They do not often entertain." "Precisely," murmured Poirot. "That is what makes it interesting." That evening, Poirot dined lightly. Clear soup, a sole meunière, and a small glass of sauterne. Afterwards, he settled into his favourite armchair with a volume of Dickens's Christmas stories, though his mind wandered far from the Cratchit family and their goose. He considered the guest list, insofar as he could imagine it. Lord Harrington was widowed. His wife had died some 10 years earlier. There were 2 children. A son, Captain Richard Harrington, recently returned from service in India, and a daughter, Lady Clarissa, married to a baronet of moderate means, and, rumour suggested, extravagant tastes. There would doubtless be other relatives, perhaps a companion or secretary, and 1 or 2 invited guests chosen for amusement or obligation. And there would be the dagger. Poirot closed the book. He disliked curses on principle. They were untidy, unscientific, and usually concealed very human motives. Yet legends had a habit of attracting those who believed in them, and belief could be dangerous. On the morning of the 23rd of December, Poirot boarded the train at Paddington with his small valise and a larger suitcase containing evening clothes, for even in the country one must observe le convenance. The journey was smooth until the last miles, when the train slowed through drifting snow that blurred the hedgerows into soft white walls. At the little station of Blackwood Halt, a sleek Bentley awaited him, its chauffeur muffled in a greatcoat and cap. The man touched his forehead in salute. "Monsieur Poirot, his lordship's compliments, sir. We'll have you at the manor in 20 minutes, weather permitting." The drive took them along narrow lanes already half hidden beneath fresh snow. Bare oaks arched overhead like black lace against the pale sky. At length, the car turned between stone gateposts topped with weathered griffins and began a long ascent. Blackwood Manor appeared suddenly as they crested the hill, an immense Elizabethan pile of dark red brick, its chimneys smoking faintly against the wintry light. Mullioned windows glinted here and there, and a great wreath of holly and ivy adorned the massive oak door. As the car drew up on the gravel sweep, the door opened, and Lord Harrington himself emerged to greet his guest. He was taller than Poirot had expected, a handsome man in his late 50s, with iron-grey hair and the upright bearing of his class. Yet there were lines of strain about his eyes, and his smile, though warm, seemed effortful. "Monsieur Poirot, a genuine honour. Come in, the house is warm, thank heaven." They entered a vast hall panelled in dark oak, its beams hung with evergreens and scarlet berries. A log fire roared in the enormous stone hearth, and the air carried the scent of pine and beeswax. Servants moved quietly, taking Poirot's coat and hat. Lord Harrington led him towards the staircase. "You must be weary after your journey. Your room is ready, south-facing, with a view over the park. We dine at 8, but drinks will be served in the drawing-room from 7. I hope you will forgive the informality of a house party." Poirot inclined his head. "On the contrary, milord, I find informality most revealing." Harrington gave a short laugh. "I dare say you do. Well, I shall leave you to refresh yourself. Simmons will show you the way." As Poirot followed the butler up the sweeping staircase, he glanced back once. Lord Harrington stood beneath a portrait of some armoured ancestor, staring into the fire. For a moment the mask of host slipped, and Poirot saw raw anxiety in the man's face. The little grey cells stirred with anticipation. Something, Poirot felt certain, was already amiss at Blackwood Manor. and Christmas Eve had not yet begun. Chapter 2. Arrival amid the snowstorm. The snow had thickened into a relentless curtain by the time the Bentley crested the final rise, and Blackwood Manor loomed fully into view. Hercule Poirot, peering through the windscreen, noted the house's forbidding beauty. Tall chimneys exhaling pale smoke into the iron-grey sky, rows of diamond-paned windows glowing like watchful eyes, and the great porte-cochere sheltering the entrance as though the manor itself sought protection from the storm. The chauffeur brought the car to a careful halt on the freshly cleared gravel. A footman in dark green livery darted out with an umbrella, but the wind snatched at it playfully, sending flurries into Poirot's meticulously brushed overcoat as he descended. Lord Harrington was waiting in the doorway again, this time flanked by a tall young man in uniform, whose face bore the sun-browned evidence of recent service abroad. "Welcome properly, Monsieur Poirot," Harrington called over the wind. "Allow me to present my son, Captain Richard Harrington. Richard, this is the famous Hercule Poirot." The captain clicked his heels with military precision and extended a firm hand. He was perhaps 30, lean and athletic, with his father's strong features softened by a disarming smile. Yet Poirot observed that the smile did not quite reach the eyes, which were restless, scanning the drive as though expecting another arrival. "An honour, sir," Richard said. "Father has spoken of little else since posting your invitation." Harrington gave a short, embarrassed laugh. "Come inside before we all freeze. The others are gathered in the hall." They stepped into the vast entrance hall, where the fire had been built up to a cheerful roar. Garlands of holly and ivy twined up the carved oak staircase. Mistletoe hung in artful clusters from the hammer-beam ceiling. The scent of pine resin mingled with beeswax, and the faint, expensive aroma of burning apple wood. A small group had assembled near the hearth, turning expectantly as the newcomers entered. First to approach was a woman of striking elegance, perhaps 35. Dressed in a gown of deep emerald velvet that set off auburn hair arranged in soft waves. Her eyes were a clear hazel, and her smile warm, though Poirot detected the practiced quality of an actress greeting an audience. "Monsieur Poirot," Lord Harrington said, "may I present my daughter, Lady Clarissa Beaumont. Clarissa, our distinguished guest." She extended a gloved hand. "Father insisted we must have the very best detective in England to keep us safe from imaginary curses," she said lightly. "I do hope you will not be too bored by our rustic festivities." Poirot bowed over her hand. "Madam, with such charming company, boredom would be impossible." Clarissa's husband, Sir Giles Beaumont, stood a pace behind her. He was a heavy-set man in his early 40s, florid of complexion, with a hearty manner that seemed slightly overdone. His evening clothes were impeccably cut, yet Poirot noted the discreet darning at one cuff, evidence, perhaps, of finances stretched thinner than appearances suggested. "Delighted, old chap," Sir Giles boomed, pumping Poirot's hand. "Heard all about you from Clarissa's magazines. Capital." Near the fire stood an elderly woman swathed in black lace, her silver hair crowned with a small tiara of diamonds. She leaned upon an ebony cane and regarded Poirot with sharp, bird-like eyes. "My aunt, Miss Amelia Harrington," Lord Harrington explained. "She has lived at Blackwood since my mother's day." Miss Amelia inclined her head regally. "I knew your reputation long before my nephew decided to import you, Monsieur Poirot. I trust you will find our little problems beneath your notice." Poirot murmured polite disclaimers while observing that Miss Amelia's fingers trembled slightly upon her cane, despite the steadiness of her voice. 2 further guests completed the party. The first was a thin, nervous man of about 50, introduced as Mr. Felix Carver, an antique dealer from London who had come to value certain family pieces. His eyes darted continually toward the shadows, and he clutched a leather folio as though it contained secrets too precious to release. The second was a surprise. A young woman of perhaps 22, with golden curls and wide blue eyes, dressed in pale pink chiffon that seemed more suited to a May ball than a December house party. She was presented as Miss Evelyn Grey, companion to Miss Amelia. "She is quite indispensable," Miss Amelia declared, "reads aloud beautifully and never complains about drafts." Evelyn blushed and curtsied prettily to Poirot, but he noticed that her gaze lingered rather longer on Captain Richard than propriety might strictly allow. Servants appeared with mulled wine and tiny mince pies. Conversation turned to the weather, how the snow had begun earlier than forecast, how the village below was already cut off, how the telephone lines sometimes failed in such storms. Poirot sipped his wine and listened. Beneath the polite chatter, he detected currents. Sir Giles pressing Mr. Carver about the current market for Renaissance bronzes, Clarissa teasing her brother about some incident in Simla, Miss Amelia watching Evelyn with the possessive air of a hawk guarding a fledgling. Lord Harrington drew Poirot slightly aside. "You will wish to rest before dinner," he said quietly, "but first, would you care to see the dagger? It is kept in the library strong-room. I thought perhaps, in daylight, before the others assemble this evening." Poirot noted the hesitation. "I should be most interested, my lord." They crossed the hall to a heavy door of dark oak. Harrington produced a key from his waistcoat and unlocked it. Inside, the library was a magnificent room, walls lined with leather-bound volumes ascending to a painted ceiling of mythological scenes, long windows now blurred white with snow. At the far end stood a pedestal safe of modern steel, incongruous among the antiques. Harrington spun the combination with practiced fingers, opened the door, and withdrew a velvet-lined case. He lifted the lid. There lay the sapphire dagger. Even in the muted afternoon light, it was breathtaking. The blade, perhaps 10 inches long, was of finely watered steel, its fuller engraved with flowing Arabic script. The hilt was a masterpiece, gold worked into intricate floral patterns. Entirely encrusted with sapphires of a deep velvety blue, dozens of them, graduating in size toward the pommel where a single stone the size of a pigeon's egg blazed like a captured star. Poirot leaned closer. The craftsmanship was unmistakably Mughal, 17th century, perhaps from the court of Shah Jahan. "Magnificent," he murmured. "And dangerous, non?" Harrington closed the case abruptly. The legend claims it was taken from a temple in Rajasthan after a battle in 1857. The priest is said to have cursed whoever removed it, that they or their descendants would die by its blade if it were ever displayed on Christmas Eve. He attempted a smile. Superstition, of course. But the family has lost 3 members violently over the generations, and each time the dagger was out of its case at Christmas. Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. "Yet you intend to display it tonight." Harrington's face tightened. "Tradition. My father did so before me, and I have received certain communications recently that make me uneasy. Anonymous letters warning me not to show it. Threats even." He replaced the case in the safe and locked it. I thought your presence might discourage any foolishness." Poirot inclined his head. "I am flattered by your confidence, milord. But tell me, have these letters come by post, or were they left within the house?" "Left. One under my bedroom door, another in my study." "Recent?" "The most recent arrived yesterday." They returned to the hall in silence. As they emerged, Poirot noticed Captain Richard standing near the staircase, apparently adjusting a sprig of mistletoe, yet his posture suggested he had been listening. Dinner was announced at 8. The dining room glowed with candlelight reflecting off silver and crystal. The long mahogany table was set for 10, 9 guests and Lord Harrington at the head. Conversation flowed easily enough. Memories of past Christmases, speculation about whether the snow would prevent the carol singers from the village reaching them, praise for the venison. Yet Poirot observed small things. Sir Giles drank rather more claret than his complexion suggested wise. Clarissa's laughter was a fraction too bright. Mr. Carver kept glancing toward the door, as though expecting interruption. Miss Evelyn Grey sat beside Captain Richard, and blushed whenever he addressed her. And Lord Harrington, though performing his duties as host with courtesy, ate almost nothing. After the ladies withdrew, the men lingered over port. Talk turned inevitably to the dagger. "Superstitious nonsense," Sir Giles declared loudly. "Show the thing tonight, Edmund, and be done with it." Richard leaned forward. "Perhaps father is wise to be cautious. India teaches one respect for such legends." Mr. Carver cleared his throat. "From a commercial viewpoint, the piece is extraordinary. I should value it conservatively at £40,000, perhaps more at auction." Miss Amelia, who had remained with the gentleman, an old family custom, rapped her cane sharply on the floor. "It is not for sale. It is Harrington blood that bought it, and Harrington blood that keeps it." An uncomfortable silence followed. Outside, the wind howled around the eaves like a living thing. When the men rejoined the ladies in the drawing-room, snow was piling against the windows. The great Yule log had been lit in the hall fireplace, and servants were bringing in trays of chestnuts to roast. Lord Harrington approached Poirot quietly. "The display will be brief," he said. "At 11 o'clock, in the long gallery, just family and guests. Then the dagger returns to the safe until next year." Poirot nodded. A wise precaution. Yet, as he surveyed the company gathered around the fire, faces flushed with wine and warmth, eyes bright with anticipation or apprehension, he felt the little grey cells stirring uneasily. The storm had sealed them in. The dagger waited. And somewhere within these ancient walls, someone nursed intentions far darker than Christmas cheer. Chapter 3. The Legend of the Sapphire Dagger. The long gallery of Blackwood Manor ran the entire length of the east wing, a cavernous room lined with ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed to follow every movement below. At 11 o'clock precisely on Christmas Eve, the house party assembled there beneath the flickering light of 100 candles set in ancient silver sconces. Heavy crimson curtains had been drawn against the storm, shutting out the howling wind and the relentless snow that now lay deep across the park. A fire blazed at each end of the gallery, but the vast space still held a chill that no flames could entirely dispel. Lord Harrington stood beside a walnut display table, draped in black velvet. Upon it rested the open case containing the sapphire dagger. The great central sapphire caught the candlelight and threw back shards of blue fire that danced across the coffered ceiling like restless spirits. The guests formed a loose semicircle. Poirot, small and immaculate in his evening clothes, positioned himself slightly to one side, from where he could observe every face without appearing to stare. Lord Harrington cleared his throat. "My friends," he began, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable gravity. "It has been a tradition in our family for 3 generations that the Sapphire Dagger be displayed on Christmas Eve. My grandfather brought it home from India in 1858. Tonight, I continue that custom, though not without hesitation." He paused, letting his gaze travel over the assembled company. "Many of you have heard the legend attached to this blade. For those who have not, I will relate it briefly, so that no one can claim ignorance." Miss Amelia Harrington, seated in a high-backed chair near the nearest fire, gave a soft, derisive snort, but said nothing. Harrington continued, "In the summer of 1857, during the Great Uprising, my grandfather, Colonel Sir Reginald Harrington, served with the relieving force at Delhi. After the city fell, a certain Rajah, whose name has been lost or perhaps deliberately erased, was executed for rebellion. His palace was looted. Among the treasures taken was this dagger, a ceremonial weapon said to have belonged to his ancestors for centuries. As the spoils were divided, an old Hindu priest appeared before the British officers. He warned that the dagger had been consecrated to Kali, goddess of death and time, and that any man who removed it from its rightful line would bring calamity upon himself and his descendants, specifically that blood would be shed by the blade itself on a night sacred to the Christian faith. Captain Richard shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Father, is this really necessary?" Harrington raised a hand. "It is. The story does not end there. The priest declared that the curse would strike hardest if the dagger were ever displayed openly on Christmas Eve, for that would be seen as a deliberate defiance of the goddess's power." Sir Giles Beaumont gave a forced laugh. "Poppycock, Edmund! Every old relic in India had some mumbo-jumbo attached to it. Your grandfather paid good money for a fine piece, and that's that." Mr. Felix Carver, the antique dealer, leaned forward eagerly. "If I may, Lord Harrington, the craftsmanship is indeed Mughal, probably from the workshops of Jahangir or Shah Jahan. The sapphires are Burmese, of the finest water. The legend only enhances its provenance." Miss Amelia struck her cane sharply against the floor. "Provenance! It is stolen goods, Felix Carver, however prettily you phrase it, stolen by violence and paid for in blood." An awkward silence followed. Clarissa moved swiftly to her great-aunt's side and laid a soothing hand on her shoulder. Lord Harrington resumed, his voice quieter now. "Whatever one believes about curses, the dagger has been associated with tragedy in our family. My great-uncle, who first brought it to England, died of a knife wound in a London street barely a year later. Robbed, the police said, though nothing was taken. My own father, on the Christmas Eve he chose to display the dagger after many years in the safe, suffered a fatal fall down the main staircase. The coroner called it misadventure, but he did not finish the sentence. Evelyn Grey, standing close to Captain Richard, gave a small gasp. Richard instinctively placed a steadying hand at her elbow. Poirot watched every reaction with the intensity of a cat at a mouse hole. Clarissa's face had paled, but her chin lifted defiantly. Sir Giles drained his glass of brandy in one swallow and held it out to a footman for refilling. Mr. Carver's eyes remained fixed on the dagger with professional hunger. Miss Amelia's lips were pressed into a thin line of vindication. Lord Harrington closed the lid of the case with deliberate care. Tonight the tradition is observed. At midnight the dagger will be returned to the library safe, where it will remain until next year, if there is a next year. He attempted a smile that did not quite succeed. Now, let us return to the drawing room. The wassail bowl awaits, and the carol singers from the village may yet brave the snow to reach us. The group began to disperse, conversation starting up again in bright, brittle tones as though to banish the chill of the story. Poirot lingered, ostensibly admiring a portrait of Colonel Sir Reginald in full dress uniform, scarlet coat, sash, and decorations. The young face proud beneath a pith helmet. In the background of the painting, almost hidden among camp followers, was the faint outline of a dagger at the colonel's belt. Clarissa approached him, her emerald gown rustling softly. "You must think us quite mad, Monsieur Poirot, to perpetuate such nonsense." "On the contrary, madame," Poirot replied, "traditions are powerful, and legends, even when false, can inspire very real actions in those who believe or pretend to believe." She gave him a sharp glance. "You think someone here takes the curse seriously?" "I think, Lady Clarissa, that fear is a most potent motivator, and greed, perhaps, even more so." She hesitated, then said in a lowered voice, "My father has been disturbed lately. Those anonymous notes he mentioned to you, he showed me one. It was vicious. Return the dagger to the earth, or it will drink Harrington blood again." "Something like that." "The paper was common, the writing disguised." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And when did this note arrive?" "3 days ago. Slipped under his study door while we were at dinner." "Interesting. And no fingerprints, I suppose?" Clarissa shook her head. "Father burned it in the fire. Said he didn't want to give the writer satisfaction." They moved toward the door. As they passed the display table, Poirot noticed that Captain Richard had remained behind, staring down at the closed case with an expression that might have been anger or sorrow. In the drawing room, the wassail bowl steamed fragrantly on a side table. Hot ale, spiced with cinnamon, cloves, and roasted apples. Servants circulated with trays of sugared plums and marchpane sweets. The mood lightened perceptibly. Sir Giles told a risque story about a regimental Christmas in Cairo that made Clarissa laugh in spite of herself. Mr. Carver engaged Miss Amelia in a discussion of Renaissance Maiolica. Evelyn sang a simple carol at the pianoforte, her voice sweet and true, while Richard turned the pages for her. Yet Poirot, sipping his tisane, he had politely declined the wassail, remained watchful. At 11:45, Lord Harrington rose. "It is time," he said simply. He lifted the velvet case and led the way back to the library. The guests followed in a quiet procession. The library was dimly lit by a single lamp on the desk and the glow of the fire. Outside the tall windows, snow continued to fall in thick, silent flakes. Harrington opened the safe, placed the case inside, and spun the dial. The click of the lock sounded unnaturally loud in the stillness. "There," he said, turning to the company with visible relief. "The ritual is complete. Let us return to the hall and await Christmas morning." As they filed out, Poirot contrived to be last. He paused at the threshold and glanced back. The safe stood closed, the room that empty, or nearly empty. A shadow detached itself from behind the heavy window curtain, someone who had lingered unseen. Poirot's eyebrows rose. The figure stepped into the lamplight. Captain Richard Harrington. The young man met Poirot's gaze steadily, though his jaw was tight. "Couldn't sleep if I didn't check the safe myself," he said. "Silly, I know." Poirot inclined his head. "Prudence is never silly, Captain. especially when legends have sharp edges. Richard gave a short laugh and followed the others. But as Poirot walked slowly toward the hall, where the great clock was preparing to strike 12, he reflected that the evening had revealed more than a mere ghost story. Fear had been named aloud, greed had shown its face, and someone, perhaps more than one, had reason to wish the Sapphire Dagger ill. The clock began to chime midnight. Somewhere in the house, a door closed softly. Poirot's little grey cells stirred with quiet excitement. The game, he sensed, had already begun. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Candlelight. Christmas Eve had slipped into the early hours of Christmas morning, yet sleep eluded the inhabitants of Blackwood Manor. The storm raged on, rattling the old casements and sending draughts snaking along the corridors. In the great hall, the Yule log still burned, casting long shadows that danced like restless ghosts across the flagged floor. Hercule Poirot, ever wakeful when his little grey cells were aroused, had retired to his bedroom only to change into a dressing gown of quilted silk. He now sat in a wing chair by his own fire, a small notebook open on his knee, methodically recording the impressions of the evening. He wrote in his neat, precise hand, Lord H., anxious, perhaps frightened. Anonymous notes, motive? Captain Chirard, protective of father, yet lingered in library. Knowledge of India, belief in curse? Lady C., bright manner conceals worry, aware of notes. Sir G., drinks heavily, financial strain evident, needs money. Miss A., fierce guardian of family honour, hates dagger. Mr. C., covetous of dagger, values it highly. Miss G., innocent, or attachment to Captain Chirard gives motive. He paused, tapping his pencil against his moustache, then added, safe combination known to Lord H. only, or others? At that moment, a faint sound reached him. A soft creak on the landing outside his door. Poirot closed the notebook instantly and sat motionless. The creak came again, closer. Then silence. He rose without a sound, crossed to the door, and opened it a fraction. The corridor was empty, lit only by a single candle in a wall sconce that guttered in the draught. Snow light from a tall window at the far end threw a cold glow over the threadbare Turkey carpet. Yet, on the carpet, unmistakable, were fresh footprints, small, light, leading away from his door toward the main staircase. Poirot stepped out, slippers silent. The footprints continued down the stairs. He followed. In the great hall, the fire had burned low, but embers still glowed. The vast Christmas tree, decorated with glass baubles and real candles now extinguished, loomed like a dark sentinel. The clock showed 20 minutes past 2. The footprints, clearly a woman's narrow shoe, led across the hall toward the library passage. Poirot paused in the deep shadow of the staircase, listening. A faint metallic click came from the direction of the library. He moved forward swiftly but silently. The library door stood ajar. A thin blade of candlelight spilled across the passage floor. Poirot approached and peered through the gap. Inside, a figure in a pale dressing gown stood before the pedestal safe. Slender hands, unmistakably feminine, were turning the combination dial with careful precision. The figure was Miss Evelyn Grey. Poirot watched, fascinated. The dial clicked several times. Then Evelyn tried the handle. Locked. She gave a small, frustrated sigh and stepped back, candle trembling in her hand. Only then did she notice the door was open. She whirled, candle raised, eyes wide with alarm. "Monsieur Poirot!" The words came out in a frightened whisper. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said calmly, stepping into the room. "You are abroad very late. I couldn't sleep. The storm? and the story about the dagger. I thought perhaps if I just saw it safe." Her voice trailed away under Poirot's steady gaze. "The safe is locked, as you discovered," he observed, "and the combination is known only to Lord Harrington, I believe." Evelyn's cheeks flushed. "I wasn't trying to open it. I only wanted to be sure it was secure." After all the talk of curses and threats, Poirot inclined his head. "A natural concern. Yet you did attempt the combination." She bit her lip. Captain Harrington mentioned once, in passing, that his father uses family birthdays. I thought perhaps I could check without disturbing anyone. "Most resourceful," Poirot murmured. "And did you succeed?" "No. I must have remembered wrongly." She looked so young and vulnerable that Poirot felt a momentary compassion. Yet he pressed gently. "Mademoiselle, forgive me, but why does the safety of the dagger concern you so deeply?" Her eyes filled with sudden tears. "Because I'm afraid for Captain Richard. He's been strange since he came home from India. Nightmares, talking in his sleep about blood and curses. He believes the dagger is dangerous. If anything happened because of it—" She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Poirot patted her arm kindly. "Come, let us return upstairs. The house is cold, and you will catch a chill." He escorted her back to the staircase. As they parted on the landing, he said quietly, "You will attempt nothing more tonight, n'est-ce pas?" "No, Monsieur Poirot, I promise." He watched until her door closed, then returned not to his room, but to the library. There he examined the safe carefully. No scratches on the dial, no signs of force. Whatever Evelyn's intentions, she had not succeeded. Yet someone else might. Poirot extinguished the lamp and stood in darkness thinking. Half an hour later, he was back in the hall when another sound disturbed the silence, this time from the upper gallery. A soft thud, as though something had fallen. He mounted the stairs swiftly. The long gallery was in darkness, save for moonlight filtering through high windows. Snow had ceased falling. The world outside lay still and white. Halfway along the gallery, a candle lay on its side on the floor, wax pooling. Beside it was a small crumpled piece of paper. Poirot righted the candle and picked up the paper. It was a note, written in rough block letters. "The dagger will drink blood before dawn. Repent." The same message almost word for word as Clarissa had described. Poirot folded the note carefully into his pocket. He looked around. One of the heavy velvet curtains at a window moved slightly, as though recently disturbed. He crossed and pulled it aside. The window was unlatched, and snow had drifted onto the sill. Footprints, larger this time, a man's boot, led to the window and away again, disappearing into the gallery's shadows. Someone had entered or left by this route. But the window was 20 feet above the ground, with no visible ladder or rope. Poirot examined the sill more closely. A thin silk cord, almost invisible against the snow, was tied to the iron mullion and disappeared downward into the night. He leaned out cautiously. The cord ended at a small grappling hook caught on the stone parapet below. Someone had climbed down, or up. The storm had covered most traces, but Poirot's sharp eyes caught a disturbance in the snow directly beneath, footprints leading toward the stable block. He withdrew, closed the window, and latched it firmly. Back in his room at last, he added to his notebook 2:15 a.m. Miss E. attempts safe. 2:45 a.m. Anonymous note left in gallery. Intruder via window. He underlined the second entry twice. Dawn was still hours away, but the house felt charged with menace. Poirot did not undress. Instead, he sat by his dying fire, eyes half closed, mind racing. He considered possibilities. The anonymous notes were meant to frighten Lord Harrington into destroying or selling the dagger, or perhaps to provide cover for a real crime. Mr. Carver, the dealer, would pay a fortune for it, or know someone who would. Sir Giles, in financial difficulties, might see it as salvation. Miss Amelia might wish it gone as a symbol of family shame. Captain Richard might fear it genuinely. Evelyn perhaps acted from love. Or someone else entirely, a servant with a grudge, or an outsider who had studied the house. The climbing rope suggested preparation. Poirot rose and went to the window. His room overlooked the front drive. In the cold moonlight, he could see the tracks from the gallery window leading across the snow to the stables, then returning, deeper, as though carrying a weight. He nodded to himself. At 4 o'clock, he heard yet another sound, this time unmistakable, the creak of the library door again. He was downstairs in moments. The library was dark, but a faint glow came from the safe. The safe door stood open. The velvet case lay on the desk, lid raised. The sapphire dagger was gone. Poirot's eyebrows rose dramatically. He stepped inside and closed the door softly behind him. On the desk lay another note, identical handwriting, too late. He examined the room carefully. No disorder. The thief had known the combination. Only Lord Harrington knew it, or so he had claimed. Poirot closed the safe, spun the dial, and replaced the note in his pocket with the others. Then he returned upstairs, passing Lord Harrington's door on the way. It stood slightly ajar. Inside, Harrington sat at his dressing table in his nightshirt, head in hands. He looked up as Poirot's shadow fell across the threshold. "You heard it too?" he asked hoarsely. "The theft? Oui, my lord." Harrington's face was ashen. "I woke suddenly, felt something was wrong, came down, found it gone. You did not raise the alarm." "I couldn't, not yet. If the dagger is gone, perhaps the curse is broken, perhaps no one need die." Poirot regarded him gravely. "My lord, a stolen dagger is not harmless. It becomes more dangerous, not less. We must search the house at once." Harrington shook his head. "Not yet. Wait until morning, I beg you." Poirot hesitated, then bowed. "As you wish, but dawn is not far off." He left Harrington staring into the darkness. Back in his room, Poirot sat once more, notebook open. He added a final entry. "Dagger stolen between 3 and 4 a.m. Lord H. claims to have discovered it. But did he?" Outside, the sky began to pale with the first hint of Christmas dawn. Somewhere in the great house, a priceless weapon, and perhaps a murder weapon, was hidden, or already in the hands of its new owner. Poirot closed his eyes, but not to sleep. The little grey cells worked furiously now. The shadows in the candlelight had revealed their secrets. But the greatest darkness was yet to come. Chapter 5. The Fatal Strike. The first pale light of Christmas morning filtered through the stained-glass window above the main staircase, casting fractured jewels of red and gold across the stone flags below. Blackwood Manor lay silent under its blanket of snow, as though holding its breath. Hercule Poirot had not slept. At 6 o'clock, he descended to the hall, where the Yule log had burned down to a heap of grey ash. A maid was laying fresh kindling, her eyes wide with curiosity at the sight of the famous detective already abroad in dressing-gown and slippers. "Merry Christmas, monsieur," she whispered, bobbing a curtsy. "Merci, mademoiselle, and to you." He passed on toward the library. The door stood closed, exactly as he had left it hours earlier. He turned the handle softly and stepped inside. Nothing had changed. The safe remained locked. the desk empty save for the lamp he had extinguished. Yet the air felt disturbed, as though someone had recently been there. Poirot crossed to the windows. The snow on the outer sill was unmarked now. Wind during the night had smoothed away the traces of the grappling hook. He stood a moment, hands clasped behind his back, reviewing the events of the night in perfect order. The theft of the dagger. Lord Harrington's strange reluctance to raise an alarm. The anonymous notes. The footprints in the snow. He was about to leave when a sound reached him from the corridor. Hurried footsteps, then a sharp, indrawn breath. Clarissa Beaumont appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a rose-coloured dressing gown, her auburn hair loose about her shoulders. Her face was deathly pale. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice trembling. "Thank God you're here. It's father, I can't wake him." Poirot's expression did not alter, but his eyes sharpened. "Show me, madame." She led him swiftly up the main staircase and along the west corridor to the master suite. The door stood open. Inside, the bedroom was in shadow, heavy curtains still drawn against the dawn. Lord Harrington lay fully dressed upon his bed, as though he had lain down only to rest for a moment. His evening clothes were immaculate, shoes polished, the silver hair neatly brushed. But his eyes stared sightlessly at the canopy above, and across the white shirt front spread a dark, spreading stain. Poirot moved forward with quiet precision. He touched the dead man's cheek, cold, then gently lifted the right hand. Rigour was beginning in the fingers. Clarissa stood frozen in the doorway. "I came to wish him Merry Christmas," she whispered. "The door was open. I thought he was sleeping." Poirot bent over the body. The wound was single and precise, a narrow stab directly through the heart. Very little external bleeding, which suggested the weapon had remained in place for some time before withdrawal. He looked about the room. On the floor beside the bed lay the sapphire dagger, its blade dark with dried blood, the great central sapphire dulled by the same stain. Poirot picked it up carefully with a silk handkerchief. The weapon was heavy, perfectly balanced. There were no fingerprints visible to the naked eye. The hilt had been wiped clean. He turned to Clarissa. "Madam, you must be brave. We will need the household awakened, but quietly. No one must leave the manor. The snow has made us prisoners here, and that is fortunate, for so is the murderer." She nodded, pressing a hand to her mouth, then hurried away to summon the butler. Within half an hour the house was astir, though in a hushed, stunned fashion. Servants moved like ghosts along the corridors. Guests gathered in the morning room, faces pale, speaking only in whispers. Captain Richard Harrington arrived first, still in uniform trousers and shirt, his face grey with shock. He stood beside his father's body for a long moment without speaking, then turned to Poirot. "How long?" he asked hoarsely. "Death occurred between 3 and 5 o'clock this morning, I believe. The doctor will confirm." Richard's jaw tightened. "The dagger?" "Used, wiped, and placed beside the body. A theatrical touch." Richard stared at the weapon in Poirot's handkerchief. "The curse," he said bitterly, "exactly as the legend promised." Poirot regarded him steadily. "Captain, curses do not wipe fingerprints or stage scenes. Men and women do that." Sir Giles Beaumont appeared next, florid face now mottled with shock and brandy taken too early. He blustered briefly, then subsided into a chair, muttering about the police. "They'll never reach us in this snow," Richard said flatly. "We're cut off." Miss Amelia arrived in a wheeled chair pushed by Evelyn Grey. The old lady's face was stone, but her hands shook on the ivory handle of her cane. "So it has come," she said. "The blood guilt of my grandfather's generation falls on us at last." Evelyn was weeping silently, eyes red and swollen. Mr. Felix Carver hovered in the doorway, clutching his folio as though it might protect him. Poirot addressed them all quietly. "Mesdames et messieurs, a terrible crime has been committed. Lord Harrington has been murdered with the Sapphire Dagger, the same dagger that was stolen from the library safe during the night. I myself discovered the theft at approximately 4 o'clock. His lordship was alive then, though deeply distressed. The storm has isolated us. No one can leave, and no help can reach us for perhaps 2 or 3 days. Therefore, it falls to Hercule Poirot to investigate this murder. I ask your complete cooperation." Richard nodded grimly. "You shall have it." Poirot turned to the butler, Simmons, who stood pale but composed near the door. "Simmons, has anything been disturbed in this room?" "No, sir. Her ladyship found his lordship exactly as you see him. The bed has not been slept in. The counterpane is undisturbed beneath the body." Poirot nodded. "Then Lord Harrington was killed elsewhere and carried here?" "That would seem so, sir. He was a tall man, heavy. It would require strength." "Or determination," Poirot murmured. He began a methodical examination of the room. The bedchamber was large and old-fashioned. Panelled walls, a massive four-poster, a fireplace cold since the previous evening. On the dressing-table lay Lord Harrington's pocket watch, stopped at 3:17. Beside it, his signet ring and a small pile of letters. Poirot examined the letters carefully. Most were Christmas greetings. One, however, was different. Cheap paper, block printing. "The dagger will drink tonight. Your blood for the blood taken long ago. No signature." Poirot placed it in his pocket with the others. He moved to the windows. Both were locked from the inside. No snow on the sills. The door to the adjoining dressing room stood open. Inside, everything was orderly, shaving brush cleaned, evening shoes put away. From the bedroom, a second door led to the private sitting room. Here the fire had burned low, but embers still glowed. On a small table beside Harrington's favourite armchair lay a half-empty glass of whisky and a crystal decanter. Poirot sniffed the glass delicately, nothing unusual. But on the carpet before the fire was a small dark spot, blood already dried. He knelt. More spots led in a sparse trail toward the bedroom door. "So," he murmured, "the murder took place here. The blows struck while his lordship sat in his chair. Then the body was carried next door and arranged upon the bed, the dagger placed beside it." He looked at the trail again. Very little blood. The wound had bled internally at first. To move a heavy man, even 20 feet, would require considerable strength. Or 2 people. He returned to the group waiting in the corridor. "Captain Harrington, Sir Giles, you will assist me, please. We must move his lordship to the bed properly and cover him with respect." The 2 men obeyed in silence. When the task was done, Poirot drew the curtains to let in the pale Christmas light. Outside, the snow lay deep and untouched across the park. No footprints led to or from the house, except those made by the gardener clearing paths near the stables. The murderer was unquestionably within. Poirot addressed the assembled household in the morning room, where coffee and toast had been laid but remained untouched. "I will speak with each of you privately," he announced, "beginning now. The rest will remain here or in their rooms. No one is to discuss the crime among themselves until I have finished." He began with Clarissa. She sat in the small study, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I last saw my father alive at about 12:30, she said. We all went to the hall after the dagger was locked away. He seemed relieved. We drank a little wassail, wished each other Merry Christmas. Then he said good night and went upstairs. I retired perhaps half an hour later. Did you hear anything during the night? Only the wind. I slept poorly. The storm was fierce. Poirot nodded. And your husband? Giles came to bed very late. He often does when he's been drinking. Next, Captain Richard. I went to my room about 1 o'clock. Couldn't sleep. Walked the corridors a bit. I may have passed the library. I don't remember exactly. His eyes met Poirot's steadily, but the detective noted the tension in his shoulders. Sir Giles was next, heavy-eyed and smelling of brandy. Don't remember much after the wassail bowl, he admitted. Staggered up to bed eventually. Clarissa was already asleep. Miss Amelia was fierce. I retired at 11, directly after the display in the gallery. Evelyn read to me for an hour. Then I slept. My conscience is clear. Evelyn Gray confirmed this, voice trembling. Mr. Carver claimed to have gone straight to bed and slept soundly. The servants told similar stories. All retired after clearing the hall. None heard anything unusual until Clarissa's discovery. Poirot returned to the library and sat at the desk, arranging his thoughts. The time of death, between 3 and 5, probably closer to 3, given the stopped watch, perhaps broken in the struggle, or deliberately set. The murder in the sitting room, body moved to bedroom. The dagger stolen earlier, used, wiped, placed, motive, the curse fulfilled, or greed, fear, hatred. He rose and went to the front door. Simmons opened it for him. The snow was knee-deep, the drive impassable. No vehicle could reach them, none leave. They were sealed in with a murderer, and Christmas Day had only just begun. Chapter 6. Interrogations by the Fireside. The morning room at Blackwood Manor, usually bright with winter sunlight, felt oppressively dim on this Christmas Day. Heavy clouds hung low, and the snow reflected a cold, steely light through the tall windows. A fire had been lit, but its warmth did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the household. Hercule Poirot had arranged a circle of chairs before the hearth. One by one, he summoned the occupants of the manor to sit opposite him, while the others waited elsewhere under the watchful eye of Simmons the butler. Poirot believed that isolation sharpened memory and conscience. He began with the servants, quickly satisfying himself that none had motive or opportunity strong enough to outweigh fear of dismissal or worse. They had retired to their quarters in the attics after midnight and heard nothing until Lady Clarissa's cry. Then came the guests and family. First, Mr. Felix Carver. The antique dealer entered clutching his leather folio as though it were a shield. His thin face was pale, his eyes restless. Monsieur Carver, Poirot began gently, you are a man who appreciates beautiful objects. The sapphire dagger is very beautiful and very valuable. Carver nodded eagerly. Extraordinary. One of the finest surviving Mughal pieces. £40,000 would be conservative. And you knew it would be displayed last night. Lord Harrington mentioned it when he invited me to value other items. I confess I was keen to examine it closely. Poirot leaned forward. Did you examine it after it was returned to the safe? Carver blinked. No, certainly not. It was locked away at midnight. I went straight to bed. Your room is on the same corridor as the library, no? Yes, but I sleep soundly. I heard nothing. Poirot regarded him thoughtfully. You are aware, perhaps, that a thief opened the safe between 3 and 4 o'clock? Carver's hands tightened on the folio. I knew nothing of the theft until this morning. Yet you have experience with safes, combinations. Only in a professional capacity, cataloguing collections. I have never opened one without permission. Poirot dismissed him with a polite nod, but made a note. Greed strong, opportunity good. Strength doubtful. Next, Sir Giles Beaumont. Sir Giles entered with the heavy tread of a man who had fortified himself with brandy. His eyes were bloodshot, his collar askew. "Damned unpleasant business," he muttered, zinking into the chair. "Edmund was a good fellow. Who'd want to do him in?" "That is what I ask you, Sir Giles. You were his son-in-law. You knew his affairs." Sir Giles shifted uncomfortably. Knew he was worried about those cursed letters. "Burned the last one," he said. "Thought it was some crank." "And money affairs?" A pause. "Edmund was generous. Settled my debts more than once. But lately he'd begun to talk of economies. Said Clarissa and I spent too freely." "So you argued?" "Words only. Nothing serious." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "You were heard to say 2 nights ago at dinner that the dagger should be sold and the money used to repair the estate." Sir Giles flushed. "Idle talk. I'd had a glass or two. Where were you between 3 and 4 this morning?" "Asleep. Dead drunk, if you must know. Clarissa will confirm I came to bed very late and didn't stir." Poirot made another note. "Motive, money, strength, yes, alibi, weak." Lady Clarissa followed her husband. She had composed herself since the morning, though her eyes were red-rimmed. She sat straight-backed, hands folded. "I loved my father," she said quietly. "We disagreed sometimes. He thought Giles extravagant, but I would never." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, no one accuses you yet. Tell me about the inheritance." "Father's will is simple. Richard inherits the title and entailed property. I receive a portion. Aunt Amelia has her jointure. There are legacies to servants. The dagger is specifically bequeathed to the British Museum. Father changed that clause 6 months ago." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Interesting. And Captain Harrington knew this?" "Yes. Father told us both. He said the dagger had brought enough misfortune." "Did this change please your brother?" Clarissa hesitated. Richard was relieved. He hates the thing. Poirot asked softly, "And you, madame, did you visit your father's rooms last night after retiring?" "No, I went straight to bed. Giles came in much later. I was half asleep." She left with quiet dignity, but Poirot noted the strain in her voice. Miss Amelia Harrington was wheeled in next, erect and fierce as ever. "I will not pretend grief I do not feel," she declared. "My nephew ignored my warnings about that accursed blade for years. Now he has paid the price." "You believe in the curse, mademoiselle?" "I believe in justice. That dagger was bought with blood money. It is fitting it returned the debt." Poirot studied her. "Yet you remained at the house that keeps it." "Blackwood is my home. I have nowhere else. And last night?" "Evelyn read to me until 11:30. I dismissed her and slept. My maid will confirm I rang for nothing until morning." Strength, Poirot reflected, was not the issue. The old lady was frail. But accomplice? Possible. Evelyn Grey entered last of the women, pale and trembling. Poirot spoke kindly. "Mademoiselle, we have met before, in the library at 2 o'clock, when you attempted the safe," she gasped. "I explained. I was worried for Captain Richard." "Yes. You care for him deeply?" She coloured. "He has been kind to me. I am only a companion, but he treats me as an equal." "And the combination? You tried birthdays?" "I overheard Lord Harrington mention once that he used his wedding date, but I got it wrong." Poirot nodded. "Tell me exactly what you did after leaving me." "I went to my room. I couldn't sleep. At about 3 o'clock, I heard a door close softly along the corridor. I looked out, saw Captain Richard going downstairs. I was frightened, so I followed at a distance. Poirot leaned forward. You followed him? Yes. He went to the library. The door was open. I saw him open the safe. He knew the combination perfectly. He took out the case, opened it, looked at the dagger for a long time. Then he closed everything again and left. I hurried back to my room. What time was this? Perhaps 3:15 or 3:20. And then I heard nothing more until morning. Poirot dismissed her gently, but his mind raced. Captain Richard Harrington was summoned last. The young man entered with military bearing, but Poirot saw the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "Captain," Poirot began, "your sister tells me your father recently changed his will to bequeath the dagger to a museum." Richard nodded. "He told me in November. I was glad. That thing has haunted our family long enough." "You served in India?" 3 years. Simla, mostly. But I saw villages where old curses are still feared. I confess the legend troubled me more than I liked to admit. Poirot watched him closely. "Where were you between 3 and 4 this morning?" Richard met his gaze steadily. "In my room, asleep." "Yet a witness places you in the library at approximately 3:15, opening the safe and examining the dagger." Richard's face drained of colour. For a moment he said nothing. Then, "Very well, I did go down. I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about the display, the legend. I wanted to see the dagger once more, to convince myself it was only a beautiful object, nothing more. Father had told me the combination years ago, said a man should know how to protect his own. I opened the safe, looked at it, put it back exactly as it was. Then I returned to bed." Poirot's voice was quiet. "And at no time did you remove the dagger?" "Never. It was there when I left the library." "You are certain?" "Absolutely." Poirot studied him for a long moment. "Captain, the dagger was stolen some time after your visit, between 3:30 and 4. Your father was killed with it shortly afterward. Someone else entered the library after you." Richard's hands clenched. "Then find them, Monsieur Poirot. Because if you are suggesting, I suggest nothing. I seek only truth." Richard rose abruptly. "Then seek it elsewhere. I did not kill my father." He left the room with controlled violence. Poirot sat alone by the fire, arranging his facts like pieces on a chessboard. The safe opened twice, once by Richard, admitted, once by the thief. The murder in the sitting room, body moved. The stopped watch at 3:17, perhaps the exact time of the fatal strike. The wiped dagger placed deliberately beside the body. He rose and went to Lord Harrington's sitting room again. Kneeling by the blood spots, he noticed something he had missed earlier. A single strand of dark hair caught on the rough stone of the hearth. Not Lord Harrington's silver, nor any woman's in the house. Richard's hair was dark, but so was Mr. Carver's, and Sir Giles's, though thinner. Poirot pocketed the hair carefully. He examined the French windows that opened onto a small balcony. Locked from inside, but the key was in the lock. Snow on the balcony was undisturbed. No entry there. Back in the morning room, he summoned Simmons once more. "The master's whisky decanter. Has it been touched since yesterday?" "No, sir. It stands as he left it." Poirot took a small vial from his pocket and carefully drew a sample of the remaining whisky. He would test it later for sedatives, something to ensure Lord Harrington did not cry out or struggle. As he worked, the grandfather clock in the hall struck noon. Christmas dinner would not be served today. Instead, the house waited in suspended dread. Poirot returned to the fireside and opened his notebook. He wrote, "All have lied about something. Richard, motive weak, but opportunity perfect. Carver, greed. Sir Giles, debt. Clarissa, protecting husband. Evelyn, protecting Richard. Miss Amelia, vengeance through another. The murderer is among them. And the dagger, where is it now? Hidden or cleaned and returned unseen?" He closed the book. The interrogations had revealed cracks in every alibi. But the little grey cells demanded more. One crucial piece was still missing. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and relentless, sealing them tighter in their prison of suspicion. Chapter 7. Hidden Passages and Revelations. The afternoon of Christmas Day dragged heavily at Blackwood Manor. No festive meal was served. Trays of cold meat, bread and tea were carried to each room instead. The household remained confined, either by Poirot's request or by the unrelenting snow that continued to fall in thick, silent flakes. Hercule Poirot, however, was far from idle. After luncheon, he requested Captain Richard to accompany him on a thorough examination of the house. Richard, pale but composed, agreed without hesitation. They began in the library. Poirot stood before the pedestal safe, hands clasped behind his back. "The thief knew the combination," he said. "Lord Harrington claimed only he knew it. Yet you, Captain, also knew it." Richard nodded stiffly. "As I told you. Father showed me years ago. And Miss Evelyn Grey attempted it with partial knowledge." "Yes," Poirot turned. "But someone else succeeded after you left. Someone who entered without force, killed quietly, moved the body, and staged the scene. That suggests intimate knowledge of the house, and perhaps of hidden ways." Richard's brow furrowed. "Hidden ways? Old houses like this often possess them. Priests' holes, smugglers' passages, servants' corridors forgotten by later generations." He moved to the oak-panelled wall beside the fireplace and began tapping methodically with his knuckles. Richard watched, then joined him. After 10 minutes, Poirot gave a small exclamation of satisfaction. A section of panelling near the bookcases sounded hollow. He pressed, twisted, and a narrow door swung inward on concealed hinges, revealing a dark, narrow passage. Richard stared. "I've lived here all my life. How did I never know this?" "Because it was meant to be secret," Poirot replied. "See, the dust is disturbed. Someone has used this recently." They fetched candles and entered. The passage was barely wide enough for one man, its walls rough stone. It ran behind the library, then branched. One branch descended steeply toward the cellars. The other climbed upward. Poirot chose the upward path. 20 feet along, a small spy hole pierced the wall, perfectly placed to overlook the master bedroom's sitting room through a decorative grate. Poirot peered through. The view was clear. Lord Harrington's favourite armchair, the whiskey table, the French windows. "From here," Poirot murmured, "one could watch his lordship unobserved, perhaps wait until he dozed, then enter swiftly." They continued. The passage opened into a tiny chamber, no more than a closet, containing a dusty chair and a small table. On the table lay a bundle wrapped in oilskin. Richard unwrapped it carefully. Inside were papers. A forged will dated 3 months earlier, leaving the entire unentailed estate and the Sapphire Dagger to Sir Giles Beaumont. Several anonymous letters in the same block printing as those received by Lord Harrington, and a small notebook filled with figures, debts, mostly in Sir Giles's name, totalling many thousands of pounds. Richard's face darkened. Giles? But why? Poirot took the forged will. The signature was skillfully imitated, but not perfectly. Poirot's trained eye spotted discrepancies. This would not have stood in court, he said, but perhaps it was meant to pressure Lord Harrington into selling the dagger, or changing the true will in Giles's favour. They searched further. Behind a loose stone in the wall, Richard found a small tin box containing a cleaned and oiled sapphire dagger, wrapped in velvet. The murder weapon, hidden mere yards from the scene. Richard stared at it, horrified. "Then Giles! Patience, Captain, we are not yet at the end." They followed the passage onward. It emerged, after several turns, behind a false panel in the guest wing, directly into the bedroom occupied by Mr. Felix Carver. Richard's jaw tightened. Carver's room! Convenient for an accomplice, or for the murderer himself. They withdrew carefully, closing every panel behind them. Poirot then requested a private word with Sir Giles in the study. Sir Giles entered blustering, but the brandy courage had worn thin. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette. "Look here, Poirot," he began. "This is all monstrous. I've been patient, but—" Poirot interrupted quietly. "Sir Giles, we have discovered a secret passage that connects the library, the master suite, and your brother-in-law's former study, now Mr. Carver's bedroom. In that passage we found a forged will in your favour, incriminating letters, and the sapphire dagger itself." Sir Giles's florid face drained of colour. The cigarette dropped from his fingers. I know nothing about any passage. Yet the debts in the notebook match those you have contracted, and the forged will bears your supposed signature." Sir Giles collapsed into a chair. "Good God! Someone is trying to frame me." "Or," Poirot said softly, "you arranged it all yourself, with assistance. No, I swear, I've been foolish with money, yes. Edmund bailed me out repeatedly. But murder? Never." Poirot watched him closely. The man was terrified, but was it guilt or fear of exposure? "Tell me about Mr. Carver." "Carver? Decent enough fellow. Values pictures and silver. I've sold him a few pieces in London. Needed the cash." "Did you discuss the dagger with him?" "Only in passing. He was wild to buy it. Offered me a commission if I could persuade Edmund to sell." Poirot nodded. "And did you try?" Sir Giles hesitated. "I mentioned it once. Edmund refused outright. Said it was going to the museum." Poirot dismissed him and summoned Mr. Carver. The antique dealer entered nervously, folio clutched like a talisman. "Monsieur Carver," Poirot began, "your bedroom conceals the entrance to a secret passage that leads directly to the murder scene. In that passage, we discovered the dagger and documents suggesting a conspiracy involving Sir Giles Beaumont." Carver's eyes widened. "A passage? In my room? I've never seen it." "Yet the panel opens easily from inside." Carver shook his head violently. "I sleep lightly. I would have heard any intruder, and I have no interest in forgery or murder." "Your interest in the dagger, however, is professional and intense." Carver licked his lips. "Yes, I wanted it for a client, a very wealthy American collector. He authorized me to go as high as 50,000, but theft, murder, absurd." Poirot leaned forward. "Did you offer Sir Giles a commission?" A pause. "Yes, 10%. He said he'd try, but failed." "And when Lord Harrington refused, did you decide on another method?" "No, I swear it." Poirot let him go, but remained unsatisfied. Evening fell early, the snow turning to sleet that lashed the windows. Poirot gathered the entire household in the drawing-room. He stood before the fire, small and precise. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "we have discovered much today. a secret passage used by the murderer, a forged will, threatening letters, the hidden dagger. Yet these are misdirections, clever, but not clever enough. The true murderer wished us to suspect either Sir Giles for greed or Mr. Carver for profit, or perhaps Captain Richard for fear of the curse. But certain facts do not fit. He held up the forged will. This document is skillfully done, but not skillfully enough. A forger of real ability would have made it perfect. This was meant to be found. The threatening letters, always left inside the house, never posted, again to frighten, not to kill. And the dagger placed beside the body. Dramatic, yes, but why not hidden forever? Because the murderer wished the curse to appear fulfilled. He turned to Miss Amelia Harrington. Mademoiselle, you hate the dagger more than anyone. You believe in the blood guilt. You wished it destroyed, or removed forever. You are frail, but you have a devoted companion. And you know every secret of this house, built by your ancestors. Miss Amelia's eyes blazed. You accuse me? No. I accuse the person who acted for you, perhaps without your full knowledge. He turned to Evelyn Grey. Mademoiselle, you love Captain Richard. You fear the curse will destroy him, as it seemed to destroy his father. You tried the safe yourself to remove the danger. But you are gentle. You could not kill. Yet someone used your devotion. Evelyn began to weep silently. Poirot's gaze moved to Captain Richard. Captain, you went to the library at 3:15. You opened the safe. You looked at the dagger. Then you left it, and the safe door unlocked behind you. Richard stared. I locked it. No, you believed you did. But in your distress, you turned the dial only once, not the full sequence. A small error, but fatal. Someone watching through the spy hole saw this, entered swiftly, took the dagger, and proceeded to the sitting room where Lord Harrington dozed. The murderer struck once, cleanly. Then, with strength born of desperation, moved the body and staged the scene. But the true brilliance was in planting evidence to point elsewhere. Poirot paused. The murderer is Mr. Felix Carver. Carver leapt to his feet. This is outrageous! Poirot continued calmly. You knew the passage, discovered it while cataloguing the library books. You forged the will poorly on purpose. You wrote the letters. You hid the dagger to recover later. But you made one great mistake. The hair caught on the hearth. It is yours, treated with Macassar oil, a scent I noticed on you yesterday. And the whiskey, laced with a strong sedative from your travelling case, to ensure Lord Harrington did not wake or cry out. Carver's face twisted. You have no proof. On the contrary, the passage bears your footprints in the dust, and the American collector you mentioned, he does not exist. I telegraphed London this morning via the gardener's boy who reached the village on horseback. Your firm knows no such client. Carver lunged suddenly toward the door, but Richard intercepted him with military efficiency. As Carver struggled, Poirot said quietly, You killed for £50,000 that was never offered, a fantasy of wealth, and you used the curse as your cloak. Carver slumped, defeated. It was perfect, he muttered. The snow, no escape, the legend, who would doubt the curse? Poirot regarded him with distaste. Many would doubt, monsieur, because Hercule Poirot trusts not legends, but the little grey cells. The room was silent save for Evelyn's soft sobbing and the sleet against the windows. Outside, the storm began to ease. The hidden passages had yielded their secrets. But the greatest revelation was the simplest. Greed, dressed as superstition, had struck on Christmas Eve. And justice, though delayed, had come on Christmas night. Chapter 8. The Christmas Dawn Resolution. The drawing-room at Blackwood Manor was hushed as the sleet gave way to a faint watery light in the eastern sky. It was not yet full dawn on this strange Christmas, but the household had gathered at Poirot's request, drawn from their rooms by the promise of an end to the nightmare. A fire crackled on the hearth, throwing restless shadows across the faces assembled in a semicircle. Captain Richard, rigid with restrained emotion, Lady Clarissa, pale but composed beside her shaken husband, Miss Amelia in her wheeled chair, eyes sharp and watchful, Evelyn Grey tear-stained and clinging to the back of the chair, Mr. Felix Carver, wrists bound with a silk dressing-gown cord, seated between Simmons the butler and the burly gardener who had been summoned as makeshift constable. Hercule Poirot stood before them all, small, immaculate, and utterly in command. Mesdames et messieurs, he began, his voice clear and precise, the time has come to lay bare the truth of this tragic affair. A man has been murdered, an ancient legend seemingly fulfilled, and suspicion has fallen upon many innocent heads. But order and method applied by the little grey cells reveal a very human crime, one of greed disguised as superstition. He paused, letting his gaze travel over each face. Let us reconstruct the events exactly. On Christmas Eve, Lord Harrington displayed the Sapphire Dagger according to family tradition, despite anonymous warnings. These warnings were intended to frighten him into destroying or selling the piece. They were written and placed by Mr. Felix Carver. Carver started to protest, but Poirot raised a hand. Patience, monsieur. You will have your moment. After the dagger was locked away at midnight, Captain Harrington, troubled by memories of India and the legend, visited the library at approximately 3:15. He opened the safe with the combination his father had shared years before. He examined the dagger, then closed the case but, in his agitation, failed to spin the dial fully. The safe remained unlocked. You, Mr. Carver, had discovered the secret passage weeks earlier while cataloguing books. You knew it led past a spy hole, overlooking Lord Harrington's sitting room. You watched the captain leave the library, noticed the safe unlocked, and saw your opportunity. You entered swiftly, took the dagger, and proceeded through the passage to the sitting room. Lord Harrington, weary from the evening and perhaps soothed by a nightcap you had earlier laced with a strong sedative from your own travelling case, dozed in his chair. One thrust, precise, professional almost, and it was done. You waited until the bleeding ceased internally, then carried the body to the bedroom and arranged it upon the bed. You wiped the dagger and placed it dramatically beside the hand. You left the threatening note and the stopped watch, set deliberately to 3:17 as a false clue. Then you planted the forged will, the notebook of debts, and the earlier letters in the hidden chamber, knowing they would be found and point suspicion towards Sir Giles. You hid the dagger itself temporarily in the passage, intending to recover it once the hue and cry had died down, and sell it to your imaginary American collector. Clarissa gave a small, involuntary cry. Sir Giles stared at Carver as though seeing him for the first time. Poirot continued, Your plan was clever. The snow isolated us. The legend provided the perfect mask. Who would search for a human murderer when a curse appeared to have struck? But you made mistakes, monsieur. Small ones, but fatal. First, the hair on the hearth, treated with Macassar oil, a scent unique to you. Second, the forged will, too imperfect to convince a court, but perfect to mislead us temporarily. Third, the sedative in the whiskey, detected by a simple test I performed this afternoon. And finally, your footprints in the dust of the passage, and the panel in your own bedroom that betrayed you." Carver's head sank. "It should have worked," he muttered. £50,000, a new life." Poirot regarded him with cool disdain. "Instead, monsieur, you have only a life in prison. Greed is a poor master." He turned to the others. "Captain Harrington, you blamed yourself unnecessarily for leaving the safe vulnerable. Mademoiselle Evelyn, your devotion led you to unwise actions, but not to crime. Lady Clarissa, Sir Giles, you are exonerated completely. Miss Amelia, your hatred of the dagger is understandable, but it did not make you a murderer." Richard stepped forward, voice rough with emotion. "What happens now, Monsieur Poirot?" "Now," Poirot replied. "The police will be informed as soon as the road's clear, perhaps tomorrow. Mr. Carver will be held securely until then, and the Sapphire Dagger, cleansed of blood, will go to the British Museum as Lord Harrington intended, where it may be admired without bringing death." Miss Amelia spoke for the first time, her voice softer than before. "It is fitting. The curse ends here." Outside the tall windows, the sky began to pale with the true approach of dawn. A single shaft of pale sunlight broke through the clouds and touched the snow-covered park, turning it to glittering silver. Clarissa rose and crossed to the window. "Look," she said quietly, "the storm is over." They all turned. The wind had dropped. The world lay still and clean under its white mantle. Poirot allowed himself a small smile. "Yes, madame, the storm is over, in every sense. Order is restored, justice is served, and on this Christmas morning we may remember your father not as a victim of legend, but as a man who sought to end a cycle of fear." Richard placed a hand on Evelyn's shoulder. She looked up at him with tentative hope. Sir Giles reached for Clarissa's hand, and for once she did not pull away. Simmons quietly directed the gardener to escort Carver to a locked room upstairs. Poirot stood a moment longer by the fire, watching the young sunlight strengthen. In his mind he saw Lord Harrington's face. Troubled in life, peaceful now in death. "The little grey cells," he murmured to himself, "they have done their work." The great clock in the hall began to strike 6. As the final chime faded, the sun rose fully over the whitened hills, gilding the ancient manor in gentle light. Christmas had come to Blackwood at last, not with curses or blood, but with the quiet promise of a new day. And Hercule Poirot, satisfied that truth had prevailed, permitted himself a small, perfectly contented sigh.